Evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Town Council's Grant Committee. First on the agenda tonight, apologies. I think we have none because we are all here. Thank you, everyone, for making it this evening. It's lovely to see everyone. Second on the agenda, declarations of interest. Does anyone here have anything we need to declare about the matters coming up this evening? Is no. Thank you very much. No declarations of interest. Point 3 on the agenda are the minutes of the meeting of the 6th of October. Those have previously been circulated. Does anyone have any questions, comments or amendments to make on the minutes last meeting? Councillor Ellis.
It's just a clarification of when it says how much budget is left. This is in budget summary. How much is left available? Is that the grant, general grants, or sponsorship, or both? Just it wasn't clear to me when I was reading it.
Well, can I refer to you on this one?
Yes, that will take into account all funding, all grant funding available. So I can give you an update.
Yes, please.
So that summary that you're referring to was at the start of the meeting before we'd actually given any sort of anything reduced.
So as an update for what's left available is in the donations pot, we've got £1,750 available. In the general grants pot, so we've got £19,363 available. All sponsorship funding is being allocated, as well as all venue and youth grant funding.
So if there's no other corrections or amendments to make on those, do we have someone who would like to propose those as an accurate record of the meeting? Councillor Ellis, thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Stainthorpe, thank you very much. All those in favour, raise your hands. Councillor Leese, are you an abstention or?
I'd like to abstain. I wasn't actually here, Chair.
That's absolutely fine. If that motion is carried, I will sign those as a record. Very much. We move on to item 4, which is the budget for 2026 to 2027. Members are asked to consider the draft budget and make a recommendation to the Finance and Governance Committee on the proposed budget requirement for grants for 2026 to 2027. Would you like to lead on this one?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Attached is the grants budget for 627. You will see that it is part of the wider budget, but the only piece of the budget being presented here is actually for the grants themselves. Added to that budget are a couple of items that relate to other committees, such as the twinning and hosting of civic events, which is £3,000, and that comes under the civic costs. And the Brewhouse SLA, that comes under Meeting Place, who are looking after the funding agreement. Other than that, the remainder fall under this committee. On a year for year, we've taken them back now. I think at the end of last year, this committee agreed to give the sponsorship grants under a service level over to the Community in Place committee. It's now been decided that they'll come back into this committee. So the funding is basically the same as it was last year, but it's just that it's been moved around between the committees. So the overall impact is 0 on the budget. The total budget has in 2024-25. The impact of the grants, well, the impact on the overall budget for the full council is an increase of 3.7% on year currently, but it's not been through the committees.
Do I have any questions from the committee on the budget? Ellis.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shares. That's good. We're not reducing it, but we can't increase it either, which is a shame. But I completely understand why we can't do that. We all want to keep the preset rise down for our residents. So the thing about the annual events transferring back in, so was it 10 grand? Oh, I can't remember what the value of that was.
25.
25, wasn't it? Yes, 25.
Right. So, and we had taken out, I'm just trying to think, so it's agreed, oh, I see, yeah, that makes sense, that makes sense.
Yeah,
So it would be a question of us, were there any actual, like, I think the intention was originally to identify those things that happen like clockwork. Slight hiccup in the fact that occasionally something comes along and they'll, you know, kiboshes it, like Pride was completely kiboshed, no fault of the organizer who was left. So, but there weren't any like SLA type things instituted, were there? Because there are now
SLAs for the Armed Forces Day,
right,
for Winterfest, and for the Flower Show. So there, and I think what we're going to ask Gail to do is itemise those within the sponsorship budget, which currently is £35,000.
Yeah.
But that covers the things that already have SLAs. So what I've asked is that we have those itemised just for clarity, so that we have a better idea of kind of the rest of the unallocated. Trying to think of the right word there. But the unreserved, unrestricted sponsorship funds, but the rest, some of those are service level agreements that they will be paid year on year.
Yeah.
just bring this.
Councillor Glassby first, and I'll come back to you.
So suddenly, so the carnival doesn't come under those
Not
SLAs?
yet.
Oh, okay.
Not yet.
Just to be clear, so I just want to know.
At the point when we'd identified those annual events, we mistakenly, I feel, didn't include the carnival. They did get funding from us last year, but they didn't get it through that particular package.
Yeah,
that
I remember it very well, yes.
Those, and we may look at potentially putting together an SLA.
And also Taika as well didn't get funding through that either.
Yeah, but we did give them funding, just
Yes.
to not hit it clean through
Yeah.
that. So that's something that we can look at.
Thank you.
Councillor Ellis.
So how will that adding in annual events that need ideally, well, I mean, like, so will Somerset Armed Forces Day have to put in like a new, well, what will they do next year? They won't have to do that.
Well,
The way that will work is they have a current service level agreement. That service level agreement will be reviewed in April to see what they've delivered, and then if it's delivered what it says within the objectives of the service level agreement, the purchase order will be raised and they will be paid for the following year's service. That's how it will work for all three service level agreements and any additional ones we add.
That is great. That means they don't have extra hassle. So that's really good. And those are really key rents. The other one, that the carnival, obviously, how do we put the carnival into that bracket of the ones that get the service level agreement? How do we do that?
I think I will refer to you on that.
Yeah, so the way I was thinking it might work in my head is in January, we submit a review for any events that we would like to do so. Any of those can be proposed, they can be formally agreed, and then we can take any forward and develop service level agreements for that.
Thank you, that's really helpful. So like Vanessa, there's a definitely Taika, if they've got the capacity to organise it going forward, because it takes a hell of a lot and it's all a whole big shebang. Sound of the Streets has been literally doing something every year, and that's not going to change. So they might, that's great. So that will come up our January grants meeting. Do we have to like submit stuff beforehand to say this is what we would like considered?
Yeah, would need to go on the agenda in advance.
Okay.
My suggestion, and we chatted about this before, when looking at events that we would like to consider for an SLA, I would personally like to see at least 3 years history of successful event management. To be sort of, this isn't something that's a policy at the moment. This is my suggestion, and whether it gets written into policy is to be agreed. But that would be my suggestion if you are putting something forward, to have at least 3 years where they have successfully run that event, so that we've got something to base that decision on. If it's a new event, they can still go through the process and apply for bid, but to get the SLA, to have that history behind them. Is everyone happy with that?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Do we have any other questions on the budget itself? Bearing in mind it is a 0% increase.
Yeah.
it's a 0% decrease, which is also lovely. But yeah, it is mostly just moving some pots around and bringing back under our control some of the things we had the temporal meeting place. Speaking. As long as no one is suddenly going to ask that we want to up the budget. That's brilliant. In which case, I would like someone, well, I will propose it then. It's for it to see to, oh, sorry, Councillor Isaac, I want to, you know, my right shoulder, you need to wave. Sorry, would you like to?
Yes, propose it, yes.
Oh, you're going to propose it, lovely. That is, I will second it. That we recommend that to the Finance and Governance Committee proposed budget requirement for grants for 26-27 as detailed. All those in favour of that recommendation? Unanimous. Thank you very much. So that will go to Finance and Governance. Thank you so much for all your hard work in mostly not changing the figures. Hopefully this is one of the least painful budget lines for you to do. Hopefully. The work lies elsewhere. So we move on to point 5, the grants and sponsorship policy changes. And I will give my thanks in advance to Will for what appears to be a permanent stated revision, but he's been very obliging. Members are asked to consider the revised policy and make recommendation to the Finance and Governance Committee to approve the changes suggested in Appendix A, the grants and sponsorship policy. Thank you, Will.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So basically, this report highlights changes to the grants and sponsorship policy to ensure greater parity in applying for grants and sponsorships for Taunton Town Council funding. Following a review of the current grants and sponsorship policies, all changes to the policy will come into effect from the new financial year, so April 2026. Key changes to the policy are as listed. I won't read them all out as there are quite a few, but I will open it up to any questions anyone may have.
I'm going to Councillor Ellis. I know you have some questions in advance.
Yeah, I've got 7. Do you want me to do?
Do one at a time.
One at a time.
One at a time would be helpful.
Okay. The first thing is more about what's in the report, not so much what's in the policy. So it says in the report, funding to be limited to projects, events and activities specifically within the boundary of TTC. And I thought, well, that's crazy because we've funded stuff that, you know, we've had low income families with toddlers who've gone to Narosh Woodlands and so that can't mean that's, and in fact it doesn't. What it says in the policy is that the group organising it have to either be based here or a substantial part of their work has to be with serving Taunton residents. So I failed to blow a gasket at that point and calm the heck down. Just that,
Yes.
that I don't think we want that to be in the report. I think that needs clarifying in the report in case somebody just was to read the report and not the policy and say, oh, well, that event would be like Hesticombe would be taking like, I don't know, loads of old people up to Hesticombe for the day and having a, you know, whatever.
Your assessment is correct. The policy does let us fund activities that happen outside Taunton as long as they benefit the residents of Taunton. It is just it's the language of the report.
I will update it should the recommendations be recommended to go to FinGov. I will change it for the report.
Thank you very much. That was a nice, easy one to fix. Thank you very much. What's your question number 2?
Question number 2. Now, normally, yeah, if you're applying for capital costs, for most works, it should be possible to get 3 quotes. However, this is based on very recent experience of the trustees at Coach who've got this decking. Complete nightmare. The underside of it has rotted. They're going to have to move the glass balustrade to get it fixed. A whole shebang. It turns out there are only 2 companies specialised enough to do that work. Now, let's just say, argument's sake, hypothetically, they were applying for I don't know, venue grant to contribute towards the cost of the works, which are, that's only one bit of the thing they have to do and it's astronomical, but they can't show a 3rd quote because it's just too specialised. Would this policy therefore rule that out?
And we've got an easy answer for this one. The wording of the policy says should, not must. Should means ideally 3 quotes, but if they can't, and I would suggest then we can add a small sentence to clarify, but it does say should. So it means that if they won't automatically be turned down if they only provide 2 quotes. But in that particular example, the should versus must is quite an important distinction. So thanks for raising it. But yeah, they wouldn't be precluded if the situation rose where it was such a specialised thing that they couldn't.
Lovely. Shall I go on?
Yes,
Very
number 3.
Oh, yes, this is the thing. This might be a question of interpretation also. So organisations provide evidence of at least 25% of match funding towards their projects for all grant avenues, excluding donations. So my question is, can the policy clarify that volunteer time can be costed up and counted towards match funding? Because otherwise, sometimes, and I know I speak from bitter experience, if you're a community group running on volunteers, and you're literally flat out delivering the thing that you need to deliver for the people that you're serving. And, you know, sometimes it may be you only had a chance to bung in 1 application here, you maybe had a little fundraising event, but you can't show the time that volunteers put in be counted?
Will, do you have a list that we discussed?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. I can add in additions that say that it can be staff or donated resources from the reserves, benefits in kind, that sort of thing. I can add that in as a secondary policy point to align that to show where that funding can come from. It doesn't have to be specifically from an additional grant source, for example. It can be from those things that I've listed previously. So yeah, that can be addressed.
Will that include, like, you've cost your time up if you were like
Staff time, volunteer time, benefits in kind, reserves, other grants. So it would cover a whole range of other sources. It doesn't necessarily have to be strictly financial.
Right.
So donated resources, for example, that could do.
Brilliant. Next point. Sorry, I'm sorry. So it says town council will not accept applications from schools unless they can demonstrate wider community benefit. So my argument is this is not logical and it's not desirable. If you're doing something for a school that is not obviously anything that's statutorily funded, that's a different ball game. But there's a lot of things that schools need to provide for children that are not covered by school budgets, and we all know the horrors of school budgets. So if you're doing something within a school that is not non-national curriculum, isn't covered by school funding, it's going to benefit potentially hundreds and hundreds year on year of little people, our little residents. So I'm like, why would you have to demonstrate that it would benefit people like apart from those? I mean, it will benefit their whole families because kids will be happier, what have you. Why would you have to show that people will be constantly coming, other people from would be constantly benefiting from it? And I'll give you an example. So like when we did first Taunton Home Ed, who I volunteer for, got one of the first grants, and it was for the Home Ed Hangout. The Home Ed Hangout were very welcoming and everything, but it is for Home Ed children and families, and any Joe public can't just wander in. It's not for the benefit of the wider public, so to speak. So I just think there's an inconsistency there, and I don't know what others think about this. I do feel quite strongly about it.
Can I give you my take on that? Because I do absolutely take your point. And we have funded some school projects in the past. My personal feeling is schools already do have quite a wide fundraising network. They have the PTA, they have quite a big community from whom to source funds. They also schools do have other sources of funding. We have quite a limited budget pot. I haven't done off the top of my head the amount of grants we could give from our grants pot if we did all £2,500.
Good question.
A very quick sum from someone in the background, countdown style. We have quite a few schools in our patch. I strongly suspect most of our budget would be used up if every school, and quite deservingly so, asked for £2,500 to fund sports equipment or a woodland trip or something.
It's 22.
22. So I forget how many schools we have in Taunton, but if you include all the schools, that would including special schools, that would probably almost all of them would be used up on schools. For a group that already has quite a large community and a fundraising network set up within it, I personally would prefer that our funding went to organisations who don't have those networks, and I would include the home ed group within that, who don't have the same access to either state funding or a wider fundraising community network. There isn't a PTA function within that as a charitable, who has charitable status. That's why I think that exception, if they can prove there is wider use, if they wanted to set up a community toddler group or a warm spaces outreach programme, something that is beyond the school, then that becomes a wider community grant. That's my feeling. That's that.
Yeah, so maybe I got the wrong end of the stick then, because I can see from the general grants, I completely see what you're saying. Yeah, I get that, and whatever. But from ward member, does this policy cover what can be included in ward members? So it would still be possible for ward member initiatives to say, well, actually, the need of my community is this school needs a new set of play equipment. They need this extra thing. Is that correct? I think I'm on that point.
Just for sure.
Yeah, so this comes under section 2.3, and section 2 is about general information, which is about all funding sources excluding donations and the ward members initiative scheme. So that point is excluded from that area of funding.
Okay.
So therefore,
that route would still be available.
Okay, that's reassuring, and that's nice to have that. Thank you.
Councillor Stainthorpe, that's right, if I can cede to her.
Yeah, go on then, Judy. I'll
Let me
come back in a minute.
Rosie. Yeah, I just want to actually agree with what Councillor Becker Hughes has said. I do have concerns when schools are able to apply for grants pots. There's so many schools and they all have issues, but you could literally be swamped by them. And there's a lot of community groups that don't have access to the funding that a lot of schools do, and especially PTAs. PTAs are well organised and they're usually quite slick. And that's where we've just got to be careful to make sure that there are groups that aren't very well known and don't have access, and sometimes don't even know about grants that are available. That's what we want to try and encourage. And it also makes me a bit nervous with the WMIS schemes, is that we don't want to get swamped where there's a lot of people need things within the community that aren't necessarily through schools. Thanks.
That's the same book. I know you have more questions. You're going to come back on that particular point, or are you moving on to question? Oh, you, Councillor Isaacs.
Can I just make a point, Chair? Thank you.
Yeah, sit back so I can see you a little bit more easily.
Went through several of the points, and there's a better explanation or definition on 2.3.4.1 in the policy.
Well, that's not fair.
Yes, which is very, very detailed, but it does give examples of the wider community benefit. So I just wanted to make that sort of comment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis.
Again, I think if in the report you can just clarify that doesn't apply to ward member initiative scheme. So that's the route if you're a school, because that comes down to us as ward members making a judgment about what the relatively competing needs and whatever of our community are, which I think is fair enough. So I'm happy on that score if that's clarified. Can I cheekily do my next one?
No, that's brilliant. I'm very happy that you're happy. So that's good. Thank you.
So far,
Okay.
relatively.
Question 4.
What was it?
Number 4?
Yeah. So this might have already been in the policy. Oh no, it's flagged up as a change. So it says general grants can only cover a contribution of 20% of the maximum size of the grant towards core costs, as they are intended to support projects and capital costs. Now, you might want to clarify, give me some words of encouragement there. It's like what you're defining as core costs as against project costs. The biggest problem for the voluntary sector, and we have actually had people come to us before saying, look, we're not starting a new project. I think it was something to do with children, wasn't it? It was something to do, I can't remember the name of the organisation, but they were really clear, this is to fund our core costs because we are going to be in stuck if we cannot you know, we've got a shortfall. They set out who they were serving, you know, it was very deserving. They haven't come back, so maybe they managed to then get funding from elsewhere. But it was quite clear that they were just trying to keep the show on the road. And we were like, that's fine, because what you do is so great. So I'm just a bit worried in case you're always having to sort of, you're looking at funding applications, it's got to be innovative and new. And you're thinking, well, the basic bread and butter stuff that you do is amazing. And that nobody wants to just go for that. It's got to be something projecty, you know? So I'm just a bit worried. Can somebody say anything reassuring on that?
Well, would you like to comment on that?
So the thinking behind this was that organisations, it's much easier to observe the impact of something when it's in project. So it can say, we gave £2.5 to X and they produced this with it. The problem with providing core funding, which is for rent, for example, or electricity bill, it's a lot harder to establish those tangible benefits. So the reason for doing this is to say an organisation, they regularly produce the same project or the same show. If it's an arts group, they can apply for funding to continue delivering on that. That's still a project, that's still going on. But would we give to provide subsidies for rent? No, that's basically what that is. Or we'll provide up to 20% for that, because we're obviously aware that projects need to keep the lights on in order to be delivered. So that's the thinking of that.
I think also it's worth clarifying, it doesn't have to be a new project. I think projects can just have images of a short-term thing. It can be ongoing work. It can be that is all of that community group or that charity does, and we're paying for a chunk of that. So it still can be staff costs to deliver the programme of work they're doing that is their ongoing bread and butter work. But only the 20% will cover utility bills and rent and stationery, photocopy hire, whatever.
Have we like taken some examples of grants that we have you know, made, and projects that we're very happy with, you know, thoughts about, oh, it's clearly, you know, had an amazing benefit, and that and like worked out, if this was in place now, would that have affected it or would it not have affected? That's what it comes down to, isn't it? Would it have a potentially negative impact? Could we double check by going back over what we've given money to, just to sort of think, oh, actually, no, it's fine, because most of these have been, you know, the way they've been costed and what have you. That would be very reassuring to me. And what I don't want us to do in this is tie our hands, and when we don't I totally get the need to check that we're, you know, do our due diligence and make sure that we're doing things really fairly and we're not, you know, all the rest of it. I totally agree with that. I'm just a bit worried about the more restrictions there are, the more you're sort of wrapping yourself up in a potential, is this going to trip somebody and rule them out that we would have otherwise wanted to support? I don't know. I think maybe going back over what because we've given, I don't know how many grants now, but it's 3 years worth of loads of great things. Could somebody go back and just check that if that had been in place at the beginning, would all of these things that have gone ahead, or would they have been called out?
I think that's piece of work, and my feeling is that we wouldn't, if you wanted to delay the policy until that work had been done, we might have a bit of an issue.
Comment on this. To my knowledge, the majority have been project based. I can think of one off the top of my head that needed it to cover a shortfall between grants, but I would have to go back and do some due diligence to see how it would impact on each and every single fund we've distributed in the last 3 years.
Yeah,
Can I just why do we need that? Because when we look at an individual grant proposal, we can look at their costings, whether it's venue, whether it's general grants or whatever it is. So we will have that information and we'll be able to see and question, hang on, this, you know, most of this is going on X and Y. Then they can answer, and then we can consider, are we okay with that? Is there a rationale for that? Or not? Why do we have to have this rule?
I think the rationale is so that we have something measurable to say, was there benefit in the project? If the benefit was paying their electricity bills, 100% success. but that's not necessarily an aim for councillors to pay people's electricity bills. If our aim is to benefit disadvantaged children or people with mental health problems or the general well-being of older people, for example, that is something that is more tangible and measurable and aligns with our aims. So I think that would be my reason for agreeing with this policy change, is to put the focus on what outcomes are these projects delivering. We could in effect pay for somebody's electricity bills and they could be terrible at delivering any outcomes at all, but we very successfully kept their lights on. So this puts the focus on their end of grant report, saying what have you done? What have you done to make Taunton a better place? What have you done for the people of Taunton? Prove it. And I think if the majority of the money is for that makes it a much more robust system. I think I can only remember one grant that came through that was the core costs, and I think if that restriction was in place, they might have just written a different application. They could well have just written a very different application. Actually, what we want this money for is to do the work they're already doing. They could have framed it differently, and we could have still measured them on the outcomes for the project that they were doing. I know we had another grant. It was a very large grant that we gave out that could have been for core costs, but the organisation in question chose to frame it as project work, and a small proportion of it was a core cost, and the majority of it they framed as project work because they preferred to then be able to give us a report at the end of it to say, this is what we've done with your money. And they felt more comfortable. I thought it was quite interesting that they felt more comfortable, even though they could have very easily said it's just for core costs, and it would have actually been easier for them to report on paying their bills successfully. And they chose to frame this project work intentionally for that purpose.
So what if somebody's they had a brilliant project, but it came in at 25, we worked out, oh, it's 25, you're out, you can't do it, or would we, is there some leeway on that? Because it's quite specific.
So there was time for you to come back, maths don't stack up, and readjust their application before it's considered?
Yeah, so the leeway is set at 20%. If it is 25, then we can go back and say, can you recost that to go down to 20%?
But if they can't, because I don't know what core cost reasons might be, then they're out, even if it's like 5%. I don't know. I don't know, because I'm thinking of venue. I mean, like venue grant, this might more readily apply to, because I'm assuming this applies to venue grant as well.
This only applies to
This is just general grant. Okay.
20% is up to £500 of the maximum. So
Right.
yeah, if they apply for 2.5, they could use up to £500 towards their core cost for that specific project.
Right. Okie dokes.
I come to you, Councillor Sable.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was actually just going to sort of ask the same question about whether it was going to come, whether it's all grants or so. By the same things, it doesn't include any grants.
This is just
So it is a fairly limited grant budget anyway, so I don't see it being a major issue. And as long as if somebody puts in an application, it's about making sure that the scope of the application is correct. And I think, we see where people put it, whether it's project focused or costs, it's making sure they put their costs in the right place. And if they're given the right guidance, then I don't see it being an issue.
So we would go back to them if it looked like a good bid otherwise and say, you might want to consider, you've put this down as core cost, but it probably could also be seen as a project cost. We could give them some advice as to how to reframe it if it was a really otherwise really strong.
I think it's safe to say Will works fairly collaboratively with anyone who applies.
I am reassured.
Yeah.
Next one, sorry. General, that was the 20%. Oh yes, this is probably my biggest worry. This was about capping the venue grants at 10,000 per venue. I'm very worried about this because this is very muchly tying our hands. Now, yes, the venue grant budget has gone down because we're taking money out of that for the brew house. But if we hadn't done that SLA funding agreement, sorry, not SLA, funding agreement with the brew house, that money would still be there and probably would have gone to the brew house. So kind of like, it is an SLA. Oh, it is, as well as a funding agreement.
It's termed as an SLA.
No, they asked for it to be called from the
Funding agreement.
Stand corrected.
So we need flexibility. I think, with this. And in the past, one example is we supported the Museum of Somerset, because although, yes, they are an NPO, yes, they've got, there's a you know, contract with Somerset Council for all sort of certain heritage functions, but it doesn't keep the lights on at the museum. It doesn't keep the museum open the 5 days a week. They are on constantly on, like, we have to raise money, we have to raise money. So I'm just a bit worried in that circumstance, we'd if we'd have had that in place, we might now have charges at the museum to get in, or the museum might have closed for a day. It's just an example to illustrate. We don't know. There are loads. I mean, I'm already thinking, my little head spinning about things like that Compass Wellbeing fundraising for a new hydro pool. They you know, probably should, but we've got the whole coach situation. There's so many potential needs on the venue thing. So, but I just think we don't want to fetter our discretion. We need it. Last time we gave it to a much wider range of venues than we did the first time round, and it's just about judging. They're all pretty much need to be told. Everyone needs to get the message. Apply on that special venue for that special venue grants meeting. But I don't want us to be fettered thinking something might not happen because we fettered ourselves and we decided that 10 was the absolute max. It just doesn't sit well with me.
Councillor Lees.
I can understand the rationale for wanting to reduce the venue grant. I'm slightly unhappy about dropping it quite so much down to 10. And I would like to propose that we actually drop it just down to 15 rather than the 10, because that £5,000 could make a lot of difference to somebody. But it also means we can also help a wider range of venues.
Okay, just and some quick maths. The original, the previous limit was £30,000 per venue, which would mean with a pot of 90, we could potentially only be helping 3 venues. If we dropped it to £10,000, that would be 9 venues that could potentially benefit. And remember, this is any community venue in Taunton. So if we increase that back up to 15, that would be a potential maximum, assuming everyone applies to a maximum of 6 venues that could potentially benefit across Taunton. And I can certainly think of, you know, in advance of that, who might want that. I absolutely take your point that there could be exceptional cases, but if the limit's not there, we'll always get people asking for the maximum, if not more, which has always happened historically. Whatever the maximum is, people will ask for the maximum, and whoever gets in there quickest gets the biggest bite. So that's my concern with leaving it much wider. I'd be more comfortable. I'd absolutely take Councillor Lee's idea of maybe not reducing it quite so far. £15,000 would cover quite a few of the, for example, the Baptist church windows would have been covered by that. The money for coach originally for changing their heating system would have been covered by that. That's quite a sizable amount of money. Councillor Stainthorpe.
Just sort of wondering that, have we got sort of the previous venue grants that we've given and how that would have impacted applying?
They have traditionally all asked for whatever the maximum was. So when it was 50,000, they asked for 50,000. When it was 30,000, they asked for 30,000. I'll come back to you quickly on the museum, because I was part of the initial discussions when the museum asked for that emergency money, and that was very much seen as a one-off situation, and they requested that after Sunset Council very sadly, very unexpectedly cut their funding due to the financial situation. But they always said that would be a 1-year situation in time for them to investigate other avenues.
Does that then become possible? Is there an element of discretion if there's an emergency, or does that is it 10,000 or 15,000? That's it.
10 or 15, whatever you write. That would be for this policy. There would not be an element of discretion. That doesn't mean there is an element of discretion within the wider council. Should there miraculously be an underspent budget line that we decide actually through some kind of project work we might decide to mothball a project in order to change our priority. That is always a possibility for funds that we have with ongoing projects. Am I correct? Councillor Garside.
So I just wanted, well, this is really a question for Gail. What would happen in the case of an emergency? You know, supposing there was some kind of emergency, like the roof fell in of the museum and, you know, it had to be repaired. I mean, please God, no. But, you know, would we be able to find the money from, is there a contingency? That's what I'm really asking.
No, it's not really a contingency, but of course we've got our earmark reserve, so a proposal could go to full council, spend some of those on something like, as we did for the money that went to the Museum of Somerset for the Chew Valley Board.
I should point out, we are not an emergency fund. That is not the town council's purpose. If a business or organisation has an emergency,
Yes.
they should have reserves of their own insurance.
Okay.
So if they're in a catastrophic boiler explosion, for example, most organisations should have some reserves. We shouldn't be seen as the emergency backstop for any organisation. That's not our function. Well, I welcome to you, Councillor Ellis. That one's.
Yeah, just to build on that, it is written both into our existing policy and within the proposed changes that the venue grant application is not intended to be relied upon by organisations. It's there to help, but it shouldn't be considered a regular source of funding for our grant applicants.
Yeah, I saw that. Well, thank you.
Councillor Ellis, sorry for making noise.
So I'm not going to be able to vote for this because I don't know that the Museum of Somerset won't need 30 grand, and I don't want to be told, oh well, you voted to down it to 10 grand if they need a venue grant again. I don't want to be told, well, because you lot knocked it down to 10, we can only give them 10, and then the consequence of that is that they have to start charging admission or they have to reduce hours. That's my concern. I don't want to do anything that might lead to such a scenario. Now, I don't know what the situation is vis-a-vis the museum and if they would need to apply to that. But I don't want to do anything that would, you know, I'd be like, I'd be sat there thinking, oh, you idiot, Alice, absolute moron, what have you done? So I'm very worried about that scenario arising. And I just think generally, don't fetter your discretion. It's all very well said we're not the whatever funder of last resort or here for emergencies. No, we're not. All we can do is say we want to benefit our residents. We need to look after our community, and when we've got money, we'll see who needs it and we'll put our best foot forward and work out what's the best way to deal with it. Just that I'm worried about that particular scenario. For me personally, I can't do anything that would, wreck the music. I can't, just physically can't do it.
I completely understand your passion for this. The museum is wonderful. And I'd be wary about writing a policy, one of our policies specifically protect a single institution that is not part of our personal remit. I'm also really passionate that this money, which is the taxpayers' money from the whole of the Taunton area, should go to benefit as many organisations as possible. That we support the biggest breadth of organisations, whether that's sporting venues, arts venues, community venues, that we support as many as possible. And I feel if the cap is set too high, it's very difficult when we get to the grant applicant stage to justify not giving people the full amount, particularly if they say that the grant won't go ahead if we don't give them money. And then all of our funds are gone on one project, and so many more smaller groups may miss out. I feel like and particularly and sort of protecting us as councillors in my advocacy of this policy, in that when we have to make a decision, it is incredibly helpful for there to be a really sensible cap. Otherwise, we will constantly be faced with people asking for the maximum that can be given, as has happened in the past. And it's very difficult to say no when someone has got a very worthy project, knowing that we're going to be giving 30, 40, 50% of our available budget to one project, when there are so many small organisations who could really need the benefit. And I kind of feel that, so I'm talking quite a lot today. Yeah, I've had a coffee earlier. I feel if we do set a sensible cap, then any organisation applying to us, they know the bounds of that cap, they know the available money, and they have other opportunities to look for funding from a broad range of other funding providers, and may encourage them to do so and get further inward investment into Taunton from outside funding agencies. I will stop now. But I won't hold it against you if you feel you really can't vote for this. Councillor Ellis.
This is in a similar vein. This is where it says sponsorship funding has a maximum application value of 3,000. Now, Somerset Armed Forces Day, we've traditionally given 5,000 to. I think Carnival, was it 4? I can't remember. I honestly can't remember. So they were slightly differing in amounts than Winterfest. So the ones that have already got on the annual list, are they to that level of funding? Whatever was originally agreed, is that protected?
Yeah.
But what about the ones that we agree in January? If we put forward a couple in January that we want to go on that list, is that new policy going to apply then, or is it a different, it just according to what?
So the policy will come into effect from April, so it won't apply by then, by the January. The new policy would come into effect.
So I'm just clarifying, if Councillor Ellis put forward an organisation to be funded in excess of £3,000, for argument's sake, £4,000 in January, to be added to that potential SLA framework, that would currently be possible, but not after April,
I believe so.
if that was set up before April.
Sure, because this is for the budget for next year.
Okay.
So in that case, we'll go back to the original scenario. We are looking at essentially this being the new cap of £3,000. Councillor Garside.
So if we add quite a few things to before April, they can have more money.
I mean, that's not like, that's not.
Okay, so how many organisations could we add to the list?
Well,
I mean, how many can we afford to add to the list?
can you just confirm how much money in the sponsorship budget is left after, put them on the spot slightly because we don't have the figures to hand necessarily, which has been already allocated as the SLAs. I think we worked out it was in the region of about £17,000.
It's say 9,450.
Yes.
Yeah, but
So it's the difference between that and the 25,000 that we gave to community in place.
so £14,000 to £15,000. Is that correct for the 3 SLAs? The Armed Forces Day, the Flower Show, and Winterfest. We think from memory, Winterfest was £7,000.
Unfortunately, definitely 5. I've got that because that was agreed at some first financial government party in year 1.
Forces Day, it's
5, yeah,
yeah.
pretty sure.
And the flower show.
15,550 is allocated, which would leave just under 20,000.
Yes,
19,000.
19,450.
So £19,450 would be left in the sponsorship budget for the year. So that would be, for example, 6 organisations getting £3,000 with a little bit of change. Getting 1.5, for argument's sake.
Okay.
So that would be 6. There is, if you would like to make a proposal to amend that change, you're welcome to do so now, but that's the maths we're looking at.
Yeah, I just don't. So what did we have before? We didn't have a
There was
max.
no specified
guidance.
maximum.
Is that, I can't remember what it says in the policy. Can somebody read back about the sponsorship thing? Is there any exceptional? So normally we won't look at anything over that, but we recognise that there might be a time when actually, it's 4,000 each or 5,000.
I think it's very hard to have exceptional circumstances because it's very hard to prove exceptional circumstances. So I think we need to sort of pick a figure. If you don't want it to be £3,000, then you can suggest an alternative. Bearing in mind we're looking at 19,500.
It's written into the policy, in exceptional circumstances, the grants committee may award above this figure. or £3,000.
That's fine, okay.
Yeah, it has always said that in the other one, but it's very hard to prove exceptional, what exceptional circumstances are.
Then it comes down to the committee to decide what would be exceptional.
And is
The
that,
exceptional circumstances could be we have money left over in the pot.
We'd have to vote. It's, I think it's as simple as that.
Councillor Ellis.
just remind me what it says about going back to my my major sticking point, is this the venue grant thing? Again, is there a thing in it? I can't remember. I'd have to scroll down and I might lose it. It crashes sometimes. What does it say about exceptional? Does it say anything about that?
Not in there.
It's omitted from the venue.
Aha. Me is sensing an opportunity for a what's the word? Called out here. Around exceptional.
Would you like that clause to be included in the venue grant?
Yes, most certainly.
And then there would be an argument as to what exceptional.
And then we'd have to, and I think we just, I don't think you can define what exceptional is. I think you only know what exceptional is in terms of the individual case, that on this occasion, this group needs to do this to survive, blah, 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 and it's so important to us. Therefore, we are going above what we've said is the target. Try having a like target, but you need, sometimes you're going to need to go, you might need to go above it. And my thing is not tying our hands.
Councillor Stainthorpe.
Next year. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Carol on this one, but you do need to be able to have, you know, essentially potential to have some flexibility. It's how we manage that to make sure that you don't go back to the same situation that you were saying where everybody just applies for more. They always ask for more than what maximum is. To show extenuating circumstances is a very different thing, and it would have to go through a vote like Panam. How you manage to show that guidance, I don't know, but I think it is sensible to put a lower maximum limit for general applications for funding.
So going back to that particular point then, I'm very much in favour of Councillor Lee's proposal to say £15,000. That's slightly more generous, but still reduced amounts, 50% at the previous count. But adding in the exceptional circumstances clause that is already in the sponsorship policy. Is everyone broadly happy with that approach?
Yes.
So we'll
I'll go with that. Spirit of compromise.
Yes. Do we need to vote on the middle, James, or we're gonna we just vote at the end? Okay, that's fine. But everyone's happy with that. £15,000, but with the exception, so
There might be no.
certain other skills. With the sponsorship, what it does feel to me slightly peculiar that it's £3,000 as opposed to £2,500. I feel like we either make it the same or we make it notably different. I would be happy personally to increase that. Bearing in mind this is for only for events that are completely free, which does limit it somewhat. There's actually surprisingly few events that are completely free. Pride and Pies have been there, interestingly. I would be happy to increase the sponsorship maximum either to £4,000 or to £5,000, and I'm happy to take any notes from the panel on that. You have a
I'm going to be in favour of that because I want maximum flexibility.
Councillor Stainthorpe.
I'm in favour of that, actually. I think given the discretion to the committee to say, I mean, you don't have to get a full 5,000 if you want to make it a 5-position maximum. The fact that it's for free events only, I think really does narrow it down in terms of sponsorship.
If it was £5,000, that would be just under four, you know, with a little bit of shape up each one, essentially.
So you make it, if you need to, you make it 4.5.
Make it around. I think making a round figure is less confusion for everybody, but if it was a £5,000 limit sponsorship, would make it notably different from the general grant pot. Councillor Stainthorpe.
Just on that thought, how many applications for sponsorship do we get for a year?
This year we've had 8. The average amount given out is £2,522. The average amount applied for is £3,277.
think that's your answer. You can give them more flexibility. You can give us more flexibility without
We need
big ribbons, to be
Yeah.
honest.
And that was with no specified cap to that
Yeah.
particular budget. So is everyone happy to propose a £5,000 cap? Just for the sponsorship? Excellent. Thank you very much. Councillor Ellis, does that exhaust?
I said, hang on.
Your question.
Hang on a second. I think I got to the end of them. Yes, that exhausts my thing. So venue grants, we're having an exceptional thingy, 15k, but we'll consider it higher in exceptional thingies, and sponsorships going up to 5. Again, there's already an exceptional thingy
Yeah.
in there. My schools are taken care of by WEMIS. I think then I am happy.
Excellent. I'm glad we managed to answer your many questions. Thank you so much. I'm just thinking so hard about it. It's really, it's brilliant. It's really, really good to know that you've scrutinised it so thoroughly. So thank you. Really appreciate it. Does anyone else have any other points that they would like to thrash out? Councillor Garson?
No, I just want to say I'm very, very happy to see this kind of flexibility now within this grants committee. I think it's I'm very, very happy with it. I think it's wonderful.
I totally agree. Thank you so much. This is very constructive discussion. It's a joy to be a part of. Thank you, everybody. Brilliant. In that case, there's no more questions, comments and further amendments for Will to make. We have been asked to consider a revised policy and make a recommendation to the Finance and Governance Committee to approve the changes suggested in Appendix A, grants and sponsorship policy. So we will be recommending the report for the policy with the changes as has been agreed and noted. Do we have someone to propose sending that to Finance Governance? Councillor Lees, a seconder. Councillor Stainthorpe, I think, just got in there first. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you, everybody, and thanks again to Gail and to Will for working on this and for making those final changes. Good work, everybody. Thank you.